pingo elare mir lutino matino.
Elare per lutino. Niang lo kama be. Mistake kaye we lutino bir bot elare. Dogina dong dang kom gu do nyabi ye en konyuri to gamente me ngwa. Manyorli tibuli do gara bo lo dano. Chumi e onda ne loy. Wala iwa to chik doko tika computing kirba. We don't have the real belief.
Edwin, that story at the beginning, the miracle, had you heard it before, and does it inform what we know about Joseph Kony?
I hadn't heard that particular story, but certainly the whole movement going back to Alice Lequena, who was the leader prior to him, is built around using people's belief in the supernatural and the importance of spirit mediums in that society that are used to deal with a whole array of problems, including personal ones. And so creating that kind of miracle is a way in which spirit mediums draw people in.
Angie, how did it strike you? I mean, how does it inform our view of Joseph Kony as the kind of spider in the heart of the story? On one hand, charismatic and healing people, on the other hand, as we hear from the children, murdering people.
Well, Kony seemed to me a modern figure in a long tradition across many cultures of false prophets who exploit people's need to believe in something and worming his way into them through that.
He's a mysterious figure, certainly. Edwin, the Abonga Papa, the chief priest, is he blaming the LRA for a moral or a spiritual failure? What do we take from what he says?
I think he's recognizing that this was a movement that actually has ended up disappointing everybody and betraying itself. And of course the problem is that this was a spiritual movement that was hoping to kind of achieve a political purpose that it could never achieve. As a result of which, of course, when you fail to do this, you end up without support. And then you have to prey on your own kind. You have to steal from people in order to live, and you have to steal their children in order to go on getting supporters, rather than recruiting them as an effective political movement like Museveni's own political movement was able to do.
Right. The woman in the clip goes on to say, after talking about the miracle story, and then they came back and started abducting our children. But Angie, what difference is there between the trauma the boys face and the girls?
Well, of course, the dimension of sexual abuse of the girls, I imagine boys were also subjected to sexual abuse, but there's that whole additional layer that not only were they all forced to become killers and in fear of their lives constantly, living in an environment of constant violence, but very young girls were handed over to the rebel adults as alleged was so-called wives, as many as 6 of them to a character, and we're talking about girls 10, 11, 12 years old, many of them forced to made pregnant and forced to have the children. This adds to the problem of reclaiming them when if they're going to return to normality. A lot of these girls' lives have been perhaps permanently ruined.
Right. There's a lot to work through, of course. So let's see a clip where some of the former child soldiers discuss how possible forgiveness is after the extreme abuse they have all suffered.
Pintu du chubu ngala ko ukwal po ne odano to udi yo mene ko dano bi ne ko dani ni ya ko de ko biara woti panga na mono bale loti bana pa chin star ba buki balta bici bukiti ko bo chocho be bal pur choy
wen dano wen kan ado to kan mer watne Kano timu kira pe, yene wai ni pe timu kira ni du kano timu kira pe no ibi ber ko, yiri ki kiri turi mo pe timu kira, aya gam.
Pura tiri ki magma be pengeo gimo, pe pengeo na jawa chua chier. Yin lok me kan pe komina ten, mere duo ki timu yiri kira. Anta wa chini in kere bero, an jo ma ken palu bir moñ ma te lu ko jamo wi ka nga ko chan no na ki ko bora pa mer ki ping ane ma ma pura tiri o mer ki ko mo cher ka ta puno timo ki jana an kero bor pa mir pe balo ngona ma mer ya timo wen ko ko na te kwano la jamala du ba ti atoro ja wetini timo ki jama kan pa mer timo ko ngara ka lum ta ka no me kirwa mot pa mot ma chan rong ma kan ne kan.
Angie, how do these scenes in this whole section of the film reflect the children, or reveal the different stages of recovery that different children are at?
Well, some of them showed a remarkable articulacy in the classroom scenes when they're wrestling with quite sophisticated problems about forgiveness, guilt, revenge. I mean, you know, whatever age you are, the distinctions between justice and vengeance are always going to be a challenge. And I don't know if some of these issues are ever going to be resolved for some of these children. But the fact that they're able to stand up and speak from a strong point of view, I mean, they have different opinions. It's very impressive and extremely moving.
Quite humbling, really,
yes.
Isn't it? Edwin, how have communities actually attempted, at least, to protect themselves from such attacks and from their children being abducted?
I mean, at various stages, they have tried to set up militia groups and to protect themselves, indeed with government support. But even there, they were then attacked. My wife worked with some people who had traumatic stress problems, and she met 3 boys who'd been trying to protect their village, who were captured and had their right hands cut off because they were carrying bows and arrows, and this was supposed to prove to them and everybody else that they couldn't help themselves.
So in a way that was a warning to other communities
Absolutely.
At large.
So I mean, it is a program of terrorization. I mean, just to come back to the difference between boys and girls, it just struck me that the girls one has to think of as victims, but the boys, the problem with the boys is that they're both victims and are forced to become killers as well.
And perpetrators
so
as well.
they're perpetrators, so they have a much more difficult problem. And just after that scene we've just seen, a boy comes forward and says, we will need to be forgiven, so therefore, you know, the leaders should be forgiven. And the girl says, well, no, and she goes on and says those things. And I think that shows the difference between boys who've actually killed, who now confront this problem of how it's not their own guilt that they have to deal with, but how that guilt is going to be treated, which is critical for them.
Well, that scene continues, as we'll see in another clip. So let's see our last clip, where the former priest Abonga Papa comes face to face with some of the children he abused and held captive for the Lord's Resistance Army.
Yes.
Hina bon mo kan dit kina na ni bere wa ke man da ni yiri ni mo kan dit man no miro be da kwaro pingo yiri tiu be bere da ko ni ko
Ki way de protein gi mo ki cer ki mo ballam. An parti ka nyaako de ne ko ati ka nyoro bicere ganga. Ate moraji. Ki gongi wek yupi de ne ru ne gyo do ko racc enu ni racc pa jobo ku cer ka ti enu ni. O timo be me penya ketano. Alego kisha ke botu do ko ngama ber ka gamane. Alego kisha ke botu do ko ngim duchu ma araber ka timone. Alego kisha don pe bala ma arabale. Wa pe bal pa le wota mo kene ma puru do lungu ko nyoma kitika timone.
Mamu be ne ko dan chaalo bi re ba ti bi le gena ko ar ko. Li bi le ba ka timi. Timi ki ja put ko ne ko dan la wo ba chere ngol dog dan o ngol singda. Ne de tam ne ngoko. Ya ke bi no di ke dong pang li timi ki ja. Ko borra me timi ki ja ko bi no carter car pa miro. Mira ku di jon pe ber be jam.
An pi loya ma dago na mo pere. An pi loya ma mo pere. Alego wuge kisha le do bet ke kisha ko joma tika dugu ki lum.